Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I am your host, Dr. Anthony Palomba. Now, today we're going to be talking about relationships here. So if we look at the first slide here, what we're looking at is discourse and change, as well as developing relationships. So we're looking at how discourse evolves over time. We're also looking at how relationships over time develop as well. And so these are kind of two separate ideas, but the idea of evolution and de-evolution are prevalent and threaded pretty well throughout both topics. Let's get started. So for social change and communications, this is considered language in use. So for social change and communications, it's this notion that language, when it is used, can help further on social change. So structuration theory, for instance, discusses how practical and discursive practices help people produce and reproduce organizational structures. So this may very well be how people at one time got together, started talking about crime in a neighborhood and saying we really should pay people to help protect the neighborhood and begin a police station, and how that's kind of spread throughout the United States in the last 100 years or so. And we keep talking about that we need police in our towns. We keep talking about that we need police in our cities. And so this is an organizational structure society has embraced, society funds, and society supports, for that matter. Human agency is tied to this. This is the consideration of the continuous flow of conduct, the consideration of human behavior. With human agency, we know that the flow of conduct, the flow of what happens in society is buttressed by humans. It is human behavior that is behind much in society. Let's move to the next slide. So structuration theory applications elsewhere. Structuration theory, again, it's this idea of habitualizing an organizational structure. And it has usually been applied in a lot of political science circumstances and in a lot of political science studies. This has also gravitated toward audience analysis as well. And so scholars have looked at how TV program scheduling, for instance, impacts media consumption, including channel loyalty and intention to view programs. So one study applied structuration theory, the idea of recognizing and then engaging in particular organizational structures with media consumption. What does that mean? So media consumption became the organizational structure. So many people were found to have one of 4 different media repertoires. They could adopt more, but there were 4 separate media repertoires. So one is computing for work. People who computed for work recognized that they needed to use email, web, software for work, and web search, and then kept doing it, right? That's the organizational structure that kept manifesting over and over and over again. And then we have TV viewing. People who watch TV viewing, there's commercials and there's programs that they're watching together. The third kind of media repertoire is media on mobile. So people who embrace this habitual consumption or organizational structure, if you will, tend to consume other kinds of mobile communication, mobile talk, multimedia messaging, and mobile web. And finally, the fourth media repertoire or collection of media consumption habits or organizational structure, going back to what structuration theory really looks at, is media online. People who consume media online, online video sites, web news and sports, digital video streaming. Now, some of you might look at this and say, well, what's the point? Who cares? What does it matter? Well, for structuration theory, if consumers are embracing one of these 4 organizational structures, if you will, this is incredibly impactful for marketing. And so if you know that people who typically are media for web or for any of the other 4 repertoires that were just shown, you can kind of target them, right? You can target your advertising messaging for those who consume a lot on digital platforms, if that's who you're looking for. Oh yeah, we found that for whatever reason, people who consume a lot of digital media, they really like buying Fitbit watches. Who knew? Because of that, if you are part of the Fitbit advertising team or public relations team, you might create a message and then send it to that particular population. And so creating these clusters and consumer profiles through structuration theory is incredibly powerful when we think of the millions of dollars that are spent on advertising and all of the advertisements that we watch that really don't apply to us. I myself have been on Spotify and I've had commercials sent to me for tampons. I've had commercials sent for me for childcare. I've looked at some of this stuff and I'm like, you're definitely hitting the wrong demo. I don't know what to tell you. You've got nothing right on me and you're spending all this money to reach me. And so using these particular consumer segments through structuration theory is incredibly powerful when we think of advertising and public relations, for that matter. Let's move forward. The assumptions to structuration theory include every person has a great deal of knowledge about the conditions around them. So people have pretty good self-awareness and know what is going on. Additionally, all people have some degree of discursive penetration, the ability to express themselves through language, or in the case of the media studies with structuration theory, through media consumption. Finally, how fast social change happens, including social traditions and routine practices of institutions, must be recognized as influential or long-term social processes. Structuration theory does describe how organizational structures are built up and how they are broken down, but it's understood that this moves at a fairly glacial pace, especially with political organizations, especially with social change in society. Differently with media, as we will see with the upcoming theory that we're about to go through, the rapidness of adopting new media, new technology is a little bit quicker in the media and entertainment sphere than it is for, adopting a new political institution like Homeland Security or adopting some sort of different societal practice, for instance. So let's go to the next slide. So diffusion of innovation, which is related to structuration theory, is the idea of how quickly consumers evolve over time. It's this notion of how quickly consumers may adopt something. This, again, could be, adopting the Me Too movement, or it could be adopting Black Lives Matter, or it could be adopting a tablet, or it could be adopting a smartphone. And so this is usually broken down into 5 different consumer profiles that people might fit into. So for instance, we have the innovators. They're the first to adopt a technology despite risk of failure. Those are your friends who are online for 10 hours because they need to get the latest iPhone. Then we have early adopters. Early adopters are typically opinion leaders who make informed decisions quickly by quickly adopting new proven technologies. So this could be PewDiePie on YouTube, the famous video game player or a vlogger, if you will, or it could be one of the Kardashians or a celebrity who kind of adopts something. They're not necessarily going to adopt it instantly because they want to make sure the product or service is good, but they tend to be early adopters, especially if they're opinion leaders. Then we have early majority. Average level of innovativeness, but probably above average contact with early adopters. They're trying to get a sense of what these opinion leaders are thinking. And again, the opinion leaders tend to be early adopters. Finally, we have the late majority, below average innovativeness, skeptical of opinion leaders, not really interested in what other people have to say, kind of skeptical. And then we have the laggards, who are your grandmothers, your grandfathers, your aunts and uncles, people who you had to drag and beg to get a cell phone long after it's been embraced by the rest of society. That's kind of an instance of a laggard. And it doesn't have to be your grandmother or aunt. It could be your best friend. It could be your younger brother or sister who just didn't want a cell phone. Those people are laggards. And so the ability to adopt new ideas about abortion or a smart car or an electric car or whatever it is, it's important to understand the basic structure here because it really does inform where people might sit in a particular subject area. Are people more inclined to embrace technology, but might some of these early adopters be late majority when it comes to societal issues? That's kind of interesting to think about because it helps us understand the complexities surrounding persuasion and understanding how people are persuaded and how different people might be and complicated they may be from subject to subject. And it also informs strategic communication. The way in which that we may talk to an early adopter is far different than how we would talk to a laggard about smartphones. An innovator might be interested in what an iPhone can do for him or her, but a laggard might be more interested in what it does for him or her in connecting to the rest of maybe society, for instance, or maybe how easy it is to text. So it's kind of different, right? The innovator may say, oh, I can go on the web, I can record a film or a movie. A laggard is not going to care about that with a smartphone. So very quickly, you can see that different kinds of communication styles are necessary if you're in advertising or PR to persuade people to adopt something. That goes the same way for even the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, all of those things. Do you think that somebody who was an early proponent for Black Lives Matter is the same for somebody who just got into it maybe a month ago? Probably not. And so the way that somebody a month ago might have embraced the movement is far, far different than the way in which somebody who initially embraced it. And so this is kind of 101 for a lot of advertising, a lot of persuasion, public relations. You have to think about at what step is your audience in the product life cycle of an idea, of a piece of technology, a product, or a service for that matter, and then advertise accordingly. One more example. So if we think about video game consoles, an innovator is going to be very much interested in graphics for a video game console. And he or she is going to be really, really interested in gameplay and the ability to share videos of the gameplay with other people. And they're probably going to be interested in profiles, creating video game profiles as well. But then if you go to the late majority, who is kind of skeptical about adopting video game consoles anyway, you might have to think about a different approach. Video game consoles now are $100 cheaper. Let's say it was the Xbox One. 2 years later, you're trying to market to the late majority. Yep, Xbox One now, it's $100 less. It can connect you to TV. It can connect you to film, right? We're thinking of different kinds of communication to give to late majority people who may or may not be interested in buying an Xbox One. Even though it was released 2 years earlier, there still might be a market for some people who might want to adopt. Let's go to the next slide. So to further burnish this into your minds, this is a general breakdown of how the diffusion of innovation may work. We do have the early majority, that's about 34% of people. And so that gentleman there is Markiplier, who is a famous video game player online. He's a vlogger. He records his video game playing excursions. He's quite funny, quite talented. And then we have the late majority. And so with early majority, they may be interested in learning and hearing about early adopters like Markiplier, who might play the latest Resident Evil. We're kind of interested in the early adopter who is Markiplier here. So the early majority might listen to Markiplier. Differently, we know that the late majority is not necessarily interested in early adopters. So they might say to themselves, yeah, I really don't care what Markiplier has to say. I could care less. It is not useful to me. Opinion leaders are full of it. Fine. So what the photo there is actually a bit of native advertising on the New York Times. It was sponsored by Netflix. It was actually an article on women in prisons. And this was done to kind of publicize Orange is the New Black. So there's kind of a social justice angle here in kind of talking about the pitfalls for women in prison. And so the late majority may be interested in that as a way in which to persuade them to embrace Orange is the New Black. Whereas differently, if Markiplier was playing a video game for Orange is the New Black, let's say, the early majority may be more interested in what he has to say because he's an opinion leader, right? An opinion leader has followers. He has followers on YouTube. So this is just kind of a demonstration of the way in which you might want to shape communication based on where you are in the product life cycle. For early adopters and early majority, this might be something that's done with Markiplier maybe an hour. It's been a long day. Maybe a year after Orange is the New Black is out. But for late adopters of Orange is the New Black, it might be a year later. It probably might even be 2 years later. Netflix may say, okay, if we're going to reach the late majority here, let's do a different kind of communication strategy to persuade them to watch Orange is the New Black on Netflix. Let's go to the next slide. Assumptions of diffusion of innovation serves as an index of social change. The rapidness with which we grow, we adopt, we become more and more progressive. Changes in innovation adoption are predicated on communication processes and channels. The diffusion of innovation is a time-consuming process. Innovation is an incredibly slow process. This is incredibly true. It is very difficult, as you may know, to persuade anyone to do anything differently for that matter. And so the best that we can do here is try to map out how adoption may be done and then try to service that adoption with energy, fortitude, and focus. Let's move on. 4 main elements of diffusion of innovation. Consumers are inclined to adopt on an innovation basis. This is based on compatibility. Innovations are linked to past experiences and technology. This is very true. You can't invent a computer and then just invent a computer that has no keyboard or screen and is completely in the air, right? That's fantastical. You have to innovate in steps. So what we have now are tablets that we can carry. 20 years ago, people might have thought that it would be crazy to carry a computer with you that is the size of a screen, but it has been done. Complexity, understanding, and use related to using innovation. People are inclined to embrace technology that's kind of intuitive. Yeah, I can pick up an Apple device. I can pretty much figure it out. It's not a big deal. It's intuitive. It's user-friendly. Additionally, we have trialability, the degree the innovation may be tried and the amount of risk apparent here. With risk, we have a whole host of things. This includes financial risk. Is it a risk to spend $300 on this new laptop? I haven't heard of the brand. There might also be social risk. What will people think if I start drinking this new cup of coffee by Starbucks that is made from beans that were grown from mushrooms? I don't know. I'm making something up. But every time we adopt something, there is some sort of social risk. People do make judgments based on the brands and things that we consume. Let's move along. A little bit differently, communication accommodation theory. So we're kind of moving away from the way in which society evolves to the way in which humans kind of shift in their own behaviors, which impacts relationships. And so with the communication accommodation theory, what we're interested in knowing here is how individuals communicate to create convergence or divergence with others. So with convergence, it's this process by which individuals shift their speech to be similar to those around them. So what we might have here are people from the suburbs going to the city and maybe speaking differently. They might embrace inner city language, for instance, to kind of blend in with their surroundings. Divergence is being different from others. And so somebody from the suburbs might continue to sound like they're from the suburbs, even though they're in the city, to differentiate themselves from others. It depends how you'd like to accommodate yourself. And again, this is a way in which we can connect with people. If I know that I'm from the suburbs and I'm looking to connect with inner city youth, might I speak a little less properly? Yeah, maybe. That might be a way for me to better connect with this population. Let's move along. So assumptions of communication accommodation theory, there are a few. Attuning. So we have an inclination to adapt to interaction styles that are used by speakers to tailor their talk to the characteristics of others. So we not only think about ourselves in this context, but we think of the inclinations of others. How do others like to communicate? How do others want to communicate? What's the best way of reaching someone? If I am talking to somebody who is from the inner city, and let's say may not be well educated, and let's also say may be distrustful of people who are from the suburbs, myself as a Caucasian male, 31 years old, well educated, might have a few obstacles in front of him. And so it is critical to consider the manner in which I might speak to, let's say, a student that's from a different area. Because again, you need to have trust from other people before you really have anything else, before you can really have a conversation with someone. And so these contexts are also influenced by our socio-historical contexts and kind of what we know in society. I know historically there are poverty-stricken areas, not only in Westchester County, New York, but also in Brooklyn, also in Queens, also in the Bronx. And so I have a perspective, I have a context by which I can go into some of these neighborhoods and perhaps carry myself differently if I'm looking to, let's say, interview people, or if I'm looking to educate people from these communities. Through communication, people not only exchange facts and ideas, they exchange, emotions and a whole gamut of other things. Communication is everywhere within these organizations and communities. Finally, this allows individuals to manage the amount of social distance they experience during social interactions. We have control over this. I will share an anecdote about this, about the assumptions of communication accommodation theory. When I was a doctoral student at the University of Florida, go Gators, I was fortunate enough to be a research coach, if you will, for the Bateman team, which was the National Public Relations University of Florida Public Relations team. So they competed on a national scale each year. When I was working with them, I'm proud to say they won first and second place, but I probably only had about 3% to do with their success. So I really didn't mean that much to the outcome. But I think one thing that we had definitely talked about was that the students for one of the public relations campaigns wanted to do focus groups in a particular area of Gainesville, Florida, that was impoverished. And as you can imagine, if you're growing up in a college town and you are broke, but you have a major public university in your town, everybody cares about the University of Florida, and you're broke and you don't feel as though you're being supported by local government, or that you're kind of thrown to the side as University of Florida flourishes, you may not embrace people from the university seeking to interview you about your banking habits for some sort of public relations campaign. And so we talk to the students about the way that they dress, the way that they carry themselves, being a little bit more laid back, dressing down a little bit, being professional, but also really being sensitive to where some of these people are coming from. And so communication accommodation theory completely explains that process. And for those of you who are aspiring journalists, public relations people, advertising people, the way that you carry yourself and you communicate with your publics or with your community or with your population or with your consumers is important. Really, really think about how you want to connect with people, because it will have an impact on the final outcome of your communication engagement. Let's move along. Uncertainty reduction theory. This is kind of a flirty photo, and why wouldn't it be? This explains a ton of dating. People are interested in eliminating uncertainty and to increase predictability. Like many of you, I go on dates. We are always curious. I am always curious about the woman that I am on a date with, and that I'd like to reduce the amount of uncertainty in select circumstances. And so, especially with dating apps, and especially with online profiles, we can learn a lot about people from Facebook and LinkedIn. We may become interested about behaviors when people violate our expectations and anticipations. Oh, she's a teacher, but she's kind of nasty or demanding. Or, oh, she's a hardcore lawyer, but she's super friendly and nice. And so it's interesting when we might have a particular schema or a preconceived notion and it's quote unquote violated, right? Our expectations and anticipations are kind of thwarted when we're given evidence that runs contrary to what we believe. So communication may enforce or may influence and be an effective part of uncertainty. And so we have this inclination of eliminating uncertainty and increasing predictability as much as possible. This is why we are attracted to dating websites that promise us, through some sort of algorithm, they'll be able to determine who is compatible with us, right? That's all in an interest to reduce risk. Let's move to the next slide. Relational uncertainty. This is kind of the other piece to relationships. The degree of confidence people have with others, it may be impacted by self-uncertainty. We may question how we feel about someone. Partner uncertainties related to the doubts one may have about a partner's level of certainty in the relationship. It may manifest when there is ambiguity in the relationship, or if there is a particular episode that may threaten or unhinge the relationship foundation. Let's move along. Social penetration theory. This is another piece of being intimate with others. People are onions, sort of. Not saying that you're onions, and I hope none of you smell like one. We have many layers to us, though, and intimacy is created as one learns more from the other person. As we peel away the layers to the core of the onion is the way that we peel layers to the core of the human being. Relationships unfold over time, and they evolve. As much as we want to rush things with dating websites and apps and figuring out people's likes and dislikes, healthy relationships tend to unfold over time. It's just how it goes. Relationships may develop into a linear manner and move through stages, from strangers to casual acquaintances and so on. However, there is depenetration. Occurs when partners withdraw intimate self-disclosure on an increasing number of topics as time moves on. If you are thinking about your friend or your girlfriend or your boyfriend and you're saying, they're not really sharing a lot of information with me, I'm not feeling it. I feel like they're holding something back. I feel like we're not as intimate anymore with anything that we talk about. Something's off here. I feel like they're holding back information from me. That's an example of social penetration theory and the idea of depenetration, the idea of kind of going back a little bit, which raises risk, right? You start kind of questioning what's going on, and then, you may have to have a conversation with one of your partners. So let's look at the next slide here. So we've talked a little bit about relationships, their evolution, de-evolution, how we might have a lot of stress with risks, and how we might mitigate those stresses. Inevitably, with any kind of relationship, there's an exchange. So social exchange theories kind of look at the exchange between people. There's social exchange. This may include trust and goodwill. We may have to exchange different things in our relationship to maintain trust and goodwill. It may be that I have to learn how to trust my girlfriend a little bit more and maybe not text her so much. That's just an example. This may help illuminate how people maintain romantic relationships and partnerships for that matter. It is informed ultimately by self-interest. You give up stuff in a relationship because you're interested in maintaining the relationship or receiving other things back from your partner or, from your best friend. It doesn't have to be romantic. It is thought to be driven by rational interests based around costs and rewards. We know that, if we give our partners massages, for instance, they may cook us dinner, for instance, right? Kind of a trade-off. We're trying to create goodwill, trust, all of those other good things that help keep a relationship going. Let's move on to the final slide. Claims of social exchange theories. So rewards of a relationship exceed cost. That's a healthy relationship, right? I am so blessed by maybe the girlfriend that I have that my rewards really outweigh the costs. Yeah, sometimes I have to, pick up the dinner bill, or sometimes she's late to things, but man, she's incredibly bright, beautiful, loves to go to the gym, very talkative, reads The Economist, at least that's my dream girl. For all of those reasons, it's way more of a reward for me than a cost. So it motivates people to sustain the relationship. And interdependence theory is related here. It predicts commitment to a relationship. If there's interdependence between two people, we believe as though we have a relationship. And ultimately, I by no means here am trying to claim that I'm a psychologist or a relationship expert, but I think based on all of these theories that we have here, whether you're trying to maintain a relationship with a best friend or with a significant other, with a lover, a partner, it's really, really important to think about how you might mitigate risk and how you might do things for the other person to maintain the sanctity of that particular relationship. Well, that's all the time we have here on Late Night Learning. As always, keep laughing and keep learning.